Okay. The first thing I want to say is that give congratulations to Gianmarco Tamberi for his win the World Championship. And after this, we have some announcements. One announcement is that you can download copies of 2 of my last written high jump reports for USA Track and Field from this webpage. So there's a men's high jump report and a women's high jump report. And they're the last 2 items at the bottom of that webpage. Also soon through FIDAL, you will be able to download recordings of this series of Zoom lectures and also the original PowerPoint files. Okay, so let's get back to high jumping. So I'm going to start by covering a little bit the end of lecture number 1, and then I will get into new material. Okay, so one of the big goals of a high jumper is to reach a very big height for the center of mass. The center of mass is a point that defines the average location of all parts of the body. And the height of the center of mass at the peak is determined by the vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff. And in turn, this is determined by 2 factors. One is the vertical force that the athlete receives from the ground, and also by the time during which he or she receives this force. So we want to maximize the height of the center of mass at the peak, and therefore we need to maximize the vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff, vertical force, and time. So we need to receive a large vertical force over a long time. So first we will look at how to receive a large vertical force. And this is going to depend, for this we need to know a little bit about muscle mechanics. So when you activate a muscle, you send a command to the muscle and you say, okay, I want you to shorten. And sometimes the muscle succeeds, and yeah, you tell it contract, and it contracts, it gets shorter. This is what is called concentric muscle conditions. And this is because this end of the muscle and this end of the muscle, they both move towards the common center. So it's just saying, yes, it does shorten. So this is what we're seeing here. This is concentric conditions. Okay, but sometimes you will tell the muscle shorten, and the muscle tries to shorten, but there is some resistance by outside forces, and the muscle tries to shorten, but is not able to shorten. It stays at constant length. So it tries to contract, but is not able to contract. This is called isometric muscle conditions. And also, sometimes when you tell the muscle to shorten, sometimes the external forces are so big that they make the muscle lengthen when you're trying to shorten it. And this is what is called eccentric muscle conditions, which is a funny terminology, right? Because we're saying contraction, but it's really not a contraction, it's a stretching. I like to talk about muscle activation instead of muscle contraction. Okay, so what did this graph show? Well, this graph shows in the horizontal, it shows different speeds of muscle shortening or lengthening. So here we have concentric conditions. Here we have isometric conditions, and here eccentric conditions. And on the vertical part of the scale, we're seeing the maximum muscle tension that can be produced. So we see that in concentric conditions, the force that you can make is relatively small. In isometric conditions, the forces are larger. And in eccentric conditions, the forces are still larger. And the high jumper wants to take advantage of these muscle properties to maximize performance. Okay, so let's look at a high jumper here. This is a high jumper at the start of the takeoff phase. And you can see here in green, this is the path of the center of mass. And this is the center of mass here. So this is at the beginning of the takeoff phase. So at this time, the center of mass has a large horizontal velocity towards the left. And it's going to be maybe 7, 8 meters per second. But also the center of mass is going downward a little bit. Maybe you can see that the path is going a little bit down here, just a little bit. And it's going downward maybe at minus 0.3 or minus 0.4 meters per second. Now, in the first half of the takeoff phase, we have that the takeoff leg is flexing, so it goes from being straight. Okay, so the knee of the takeoff leg is flexing. And normally when the leg flexes, you will be going down in any jump. Like if you do a standing vertical jump, leg flexes means you're going down. But here we have a paradox. We have that while the leg is flexing, the center of mass is already moving up. Between the start of the takeoff phase, when you have like minus 0.3 or minus 0.4 meters per second, very soon, around this point here, that velocity downward becomes 0. So velocity is 0, and from this point, you have upward velocity all the way to this halfway point into the takeoff phase. So normally, like in a standing vertical jump, when you're moving upward, your muscles are in concentric conditions. You're extending your leg in a standing vertical jump. But here we see that in a high jump, while the leg is flexing, here it's straight, here it's flexing, the center of mass is moving upward, which is a paradox. So what we have is the possibility of using eccentric conditions, which are the strongest. We're using them not to stop a downward motion, but to actually produce an upward motion. So you are in eccentric conditions in this first half of the takeoff phase. And the second phase of the high jump is not so surprising. It's you're going upward and the muscles are in concentric conditions. So that's what everybody would expect. But the interesting part is this first half in which you're eccentric, but you're using that eccentric to propel you upward. So for a high jumper to maximize the force that the foot makes on the ground, it is good to have a fast run-up. Well, in the run-up, at the end of the run-up, you want to be going fast because the faster that the center of mass is moving that way, the faster the leg will flex. And in fast eccentric conditions, you can make bigger forces than in slower eccentric conditions. So we say that it's good to have a fast run-up to increase the force. But there's a limit to this. If you go too fast, that is also not good. Because if you go too fast, then the takeoff leg will flex too much, and then you will be in a situation with bad levers. And then if you flex that leg too much, it is difficult to extend it again, and the jump is very bad. If you're too fast, the leg can collapse, or maybe not that bad, but maybe its extension, then it's compromised, it's not as good, and you do a jump, but it's not as high as it should be. So there is an optimum value for the run-up speed. It should be fast, but not too fast. And the optimum speed is going to depend on the strength of the high jumper. If you're a very strong high jumper, if you're an elite high jumper, your optimum speed is going to be fast. If you're a weak high jumper, your optimum speed is going to be a slower one. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. We have to try to find this optimum. Okay, in this graphic, you see every dot is one jump by one high jumper. And in the horizontal, what you have is the vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff phase. And this is imperfect, but it's the best way we have of evaluating the power of the takeoff leg of the high jumper. So the powerful high jumpers, the good ones, are to the right. So around here, you would have Sotomayor. And here on the extreme left, you would have the weak high jumpers. Like, for example, okay, so the vertical scale here shows the final speed of the run-up in all of these high jumpers. So you see that there's an upward tendency. You see this is the regression line here, and it's what you would expect. The stronger high jumpers tend to use faster run-ups. So in the talk number one, we're still at the end of talk number one. In talk number one, I explained how we could find out approximately what is the optimum speed of the run-up for each one of these high jumpers, and it's indicated by this red line here.
Okay.
The red line is the optimum. So for a person like Da Pena here, my optimum would be around here, which is like 6.8, 6.9 meters per second. For a very good high jumper around here, like Sotomayor, it would be this run-up speed, maybe 8.4 meters per second. That would be the optimum technique. Now, when I give advice to a high jumper, I don't want to take them too far to the limit. I want to be conservative. So what I normally use is this other line, the yellow one. So this is the target. This is where I want people to be. Again, the detailed explanations for this are in lecture number one. Okay, so now we're going to have new material here. But before that, I'm going to answer a question that somebody posted after lecture number one. And the question was like this. I'm going to paraphrase it. I don't know the exact words, but it was something like this. The question was like this. Could you talk more deeply about the isometric contribution of muscles to the takeoff phase? And then, how important is isometric muscle action for the production of a good jump? And here's my response. During the takeoff phase, the muscles are first, for a little while, they are in fast eccentric conditions. Then for a little while, they are in slow eccentric conditions. Then they are in isometric conditions, but only instantaneously, because immediately they go into slow concentric. So then for a little while, they are in slow concentric, and then for a little while, they are in fast concentric, and then the foot leaves the ground. So while both the eccentric conditions and the concentric conditions, they both last for a certain amount of time, the isometric conditions only occur instantaneously at the dividing point between the eccentric and the concentric periods. So what is necessary to understand is that your capability for making force in eccentric conditions is very important. We normally think only about concentric conditions. How can I extend my takeoff leg better? But you really need to think also about training your muscle capabilities for eccentric conditions. So how can I get stronger for stopping the flexion of my takeoff leg? So how can you train the eccentric capabilities of your takeoff leg? Now, physical conditioning is outside my area of expertise, but it is possible that you can train the eccentric capabilities of your leg muscles through what is called depth jumping. So in depth jumping, you climb onto a high horizontal surface, and then you allow yourself to drop onto the floor. So then you may just stop the fall, in which case you would be training the eccentric capabilities of your leg muscles, or you may rebound upward into an upward vertical jump, in which case you would be training the eccentric capabilities of the muscles and also the concentric capabilities. Okay, so having said that, I have to give you a warning here. The forces involved in depth jumping can be very big, especially if you drop from a big height. So you will need to be careful because the risk of injury will be increased. Anyway, that warning. So that is my answer to that question. There will be another question later on. Okay, so now, new material. So we know that you want to make a large vertical force on the ground, and you want to make that force over a long time. So we already looked at the vertical force. We saw that a fast run-up helps you to produce a large vertical force. Now we're going to look at the long time. Now, this time will also always be short, like a high jump takeoff lasts somewhere between 0.15 and 0.20 seconds, which is a very short time. But still, 0.20 seconds is 1/3 longer than 0.15 seconds. So it's a big difference. Okay, so here we have a high jumper at the start of the takeoff phase and at the end of the takeoff phase. If you're making a full effort in a jump, the only way to increase the time, the duration of the takeoff phase is to have a large vertical, is to increase the vertical range of motion of the center of mass during the takeoff phase. In Spanish, it would be called recorrido. I don't know if you have an equivalent Italian term. Okay, so you want to be low at the start of the takeoff phase, and you want to be high at the end of the takeoff phase. So first, let's see how you can be high at the end of the takeoff phase. Well, you need plantar flexion of the ankle. You want your body to be straight, very vertical. You want your takeoff leg to be straight or very close to straight. And the free leg, you want it to be high. And the arms also, you want them to be high. Okay, with all of those things, you will be in the highest possible position at the end of the takeoff phase. And this is very easy to do. Yes, the difficult part is being low at the start of the takeoff phase. This is because to be low at the start of the takeoff phase, it means that you have to be low already in the last 1 or 2 steps of the run-up. And it's very difficult to run fast and low. And many high jumpers, including many elite high jumpers, they don't know how to do both of those things together. So we want to be low at the end of the run-up. But if you go too low, that is also a problem. So we need to know what the optimum is, similar to what we did for the running speed. So we're going to be making a similar graphic to what we did for the running speed. Okay, we're going to plot in the horizontal, exactly like we did before. We're going to have the value of the vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff phase. And this is a rough indication of how powerful the takeoff leg is. Because if you have a stronger takeoff leg, you can be low and not buckle. But if you have a weaker takeoff leg, then you cannot be so low because your leg will collapse. So in our graphic, in the horizontal, we're going to have this value, vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff phase, as an indicator of the strength of the takeoff leg. And then in the vertical part of the graph, the last time we looked at the speed of the run-up. Now we're going to look at the height of the center of mass at the end of the run-up. Okay, so here's our graph. In the horizontal, you have the vertical velocity at the end of the takeoff phase. So the strong athletes will be on the right. So again, just like before, we have Sotomayor on the right. And here on the left, we have Da Pena. So powerful jumpers on the right, weak jumpers on the left. Now in the vertical part of the graph, we have the height of the center of mass at the end of the run-up or at the start of the takeoff phase. It's the same instant. Now, that would be a value in meters. So maybe you will be 1.02 meters high. But the problem with that is that if you're very tall, your center of mass is going to be high. And if you're very short, your center of mass is going to be low. So we need to make a correction, an adjustment for that height. So we're going to express the height of the center of mass as a percentage of the athlete's standing height. So that way we can compare athletes, even if some are short and some are tall. So what we have here is a graphic that you see has more scatter than the previous one, but you can still see a clear downward trend, this green line. So this makes sense. The more powerful high jumpers, the stronger high jumpers, will tend to be lower at the end of the run-up than the weaker high jumpers. So what we want to do in this graphic is we want to find out what is the optimum height of the center of mass. So in some let's say that we have one high jumper, and this high jumper, we know that his or her optimum height at the end of the run-up is maybe 46%. And we normally do not know this, okay? But let's say that we know what it is. We asked Prediction Globe, and we said, what is the optimum? And he says, 46%. Okay, we believe it. Let's say that's true. And so now this athlete is a new athlete, and he or she does not think of being low, just runs normally and just takes off and makes a jump. And he comes in at maybe 57% of standing height, which is very, very high. So he jumps a certain height, and then somebody tells him, hey, I've heard that if you come a little bit lower, you may jump higher. Okay, so he tries, makes a jump, and he comes in now at maybe 52% of standing height. And maybe in this jump, you'll see that he jumps higher. Like, oh, that is very good, jumped higher. So the athlete says, okay, good. From now on, I will come at 52%. It's better than 57%. And then the other person, the friend, says, you know, maybe if you go lower, maybe it'll be still better. Why didn't you come in at 46%? And this athlete comes in at 46%, and wow, still better height. Now, we know that 46% is the optimum for this person, but they don't know this. So the friend says, hey, try coming in a little bit lower. Come in at 43%. So the athlete comes at 43%, and it's difficult to run that low. It's very uncomfortable, but he comes in at 43%, puts the leg on the ground, the leg collapses, he goes straight into the pit. Or maybe it does not collapse completely, but it flexes a lot and extends with a lot of difficulty, and you get a jump, but it's a lower jump than what he got at 46%. What do you think this athlete is going to do in the next jump? Is he going to come in at 43%? No, he will come in at 46%. He come in at the optimum. Now, so some jumpers will find their optimum this way. It's a very easy correction to make because running fast and running low is a very difficult thing to do. So coming in higher, it's a very easy correction. It's very comfortable to do that. So it's an immediate correction that the athlete will be able to do. So the athlete normally will correct. Instead of coming in at 43%, he'll come in at 46, he'll be at optimum, and that's it, perfect. Now, some jumpers can be crazy, and maybe some jumpers will come in at this jumper maybe will come in at 43%, and the jump is not very good, but this jumper just keeps jumping that way. This would be very unusual because you can tell that you're not jumping as high, but so what percentage of high jumpers will do this kamikaze approach? I don't know, 1%, 2%, I don't know the number, but it's going to be very few. Okay, so some athletes will end up at the correct optimum. Very few will be lower than the correct optimum. But then for other jumpers, it will work differently. For some jumper, let's say again, another jumper whose optimum really is 46%, and they start at 57, and they jump badly, then they go to 52, and they jump better, then they go to 48, and they jump better. But then when they're going to try 46, they cannot try 46 because they don't know. They're not able to get low. They're not trained properly. They don't know how to run low. This could be because the athlete is not strong enough in their legs to get low, or it could be that the athlete does not know that being low is a good thing. So when you look at all high jumpers, you're going to find some who are at the optimum height, very few who are lower than optimum, and quite a few who are higher than the optimum. So when you look at the average of all of them, the average high jumper is higher than optimum. So this regression line, this green line here, that is average. So we know that if you fall on that green line, well, now it's a red line. If you fall on that line, you're too high. If you're higher than that line, if you're here or here or here, you're even higher. You're farther away from the optimum. Now, where is the optimum? Okay, well, it depends on how many people we believe are crazy enough that they are all the time using a run-up that is too low. So here we have, I think it's 93 high jumpers, basically about 100 high jumpers in this graphic. Well, I don't know, maybe this guy is too low. Maybe this one is too low. I don't know about this one and this one. But the optimum must be very close to that. Again, when I try to give advice to athletes, I want to be conservative, so I don't tell them to go to the red line. I give them this other line, a different target. So this is one standard deviation below the average. And one standard deviation will hold about 2/3 of all high jumpers. So between this line here and a line on top, like about maybe there, that will comprise about 2/3 of all of these jumpers. I didn't say that right. About 2/3 of all the high jumpers will be between this line and this line, so that we're not having people try to go to a very extreme value. So if you're this person here, will tell you, no, you have to move onto this line. If you're this one, we tell you to go to that line. And the same with everybody up there. Now, what about this one? Well, we say, you're probably okay. Now, what about these guys? What about this guy here? Wow, it looks like a crazy guy, right? So we could say, I want you to move onto the yellow line, maybe just to the red line, or maybe all the way to the yellow line. That's a possibility. Okay, so a thing that we have to consider here is that having a fast run-up is good for you. Is the previous talk about run-up speed. Being fast is a good thing. It puts your takeoff leg in stressful conditions that allow it to make big force. And here we have that being low gives you more time for the takeoff, but it also puts more stress on the takeoff leg during the takeoff phase. So when I give advice, I have to look at both of these pieces of information. For example, let's look at this athlete here. This athlete, we would normally say, no, you're too high. You should be in the yellow line. You should be around here. But when I look at this same athlete in the speed graph, maybe let's imagine that this athlete is one of the kamikazes. He's going extremely fast, in which case I may say, okay, you're not very low here in this graphic, but you're so fast that the combination is okay. So I really have to consider both factors before giving advice. So so one thing that is useful is to have a number that represents the combination of how fast you are and how low you are. And I have such a number. It's a number that I call the radial velocity, and I'm not going to explain it here because it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But I do have a way of combining the two. I call it radial velocity. I will not talk more about that. We'll leave it there. I can combine the two is the idea. Okay, now at this point, I have another question from lecture 1 that I want to answer here. The question is the following. It said, and the question was like this. You mentioned the use of eccentric actions of muscles during the rising of the center of mass within the takeoff phase. What about the influence of the curve of the run-up that lowers the center of mass in the curve? Does it make a contribution to a further elevation of the center of mass during the takeoff phase? So my response is yes. By running on a curve, that helps to lower the center of mass in the run-up. And this is good because it helps you to be in a lower position at the start of the takeoff phase. And therefore, it helps to produce a larger vertical range of motion during the takeoff phase. And some coaches believe that simply by running on a curve, that's it. You're low enough by running on a curve. But no. Generally, running on a curve does not produce enough lowering. You need to run with bent legs. But the center of mass can be lowered by being on a curve. So instead of being here, you're lower, but also you have to flex your legs to be lower.
Your hands explain better than our words the situation, Professor.
Okay, so we saw that fast run-up helps you to make a bigger force. Being low helps you to make that force over a longer time. But there's another way to increase the vertical force, and this is through the use of your free limb actions. Free limbs are the two arms and the lead leg.
Okay. Leggera.
Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Well, this is
So, Professor, just one question.
Yeah.
So you define together arms and the leg, free limb.
Yes.
Yeah, they all are free limbs. You have free limbs. Okay, you have one not free limb, which is the takeoff leg. It's attached to the ground.
Yeah.
But then you have the swinging leg and the swinging arms. Those are the free limbs. There's
Okay. So except for the takeoff leg.
three. Right. Mhm.
Good. Good. Very good.
Leg is not a free limb, but the other three, they're free limbs.
Okay.
Okay, so here we have a high jump takeoff. And what you have is that the free leg, the right leg here is going to go forward and then up. And the arms also go first horizontally and then they also swing up. So this helps you to make a bigger force on the ground. So I'm going to explain why. So first I'll give you the what I call the cheap version. And then I'll explain you a little bit more about the real version. So to swing your arms up, your arms have to accelerate upwards, so your trunk through the shoulders makes upward forces on the arms. So the trunk pushes the arms up. By reaction, the arms push downward on the trunk. And by doing that, this force squeezes the whole body against the ground. So the support leg will make a bigger force on the ground. And therefore, the ground will make a bigger upward reaction force on the body. Okay, so this is the cheap version. So by swinging your arms up, you're helping your support foot to push downward on the ground, and the ground pushes harder upward on your foot. So this is actually is not too bad an explanation. It's a lot of the truth is in there. But what happens in reality is this. Your trunk pushes upward on the arms, and the arms push downward on the trunk. And at this time, the support leg is going to be extending. So the support leg, the muscles, and we're simplifying a lot. I'm thinking about the quadriceps primarily. Okay, so the quadriceps is going to be shortening and shortening fast. And those are conditions that are fast, concentric, so they are weak conditions. But because the arms are pushing downward on the trunk, it means that the support leg cannot extend so quickly. And therefore, the muscles will be in slower, slightly slower concentric conditions. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it can make a bigger force. So that allows the foot to make a slightly bigger force downward on the ground. And the reaction force will be also a little bit bigger. So the big summary here is if you swing the arms and the lead leg upward, then you will be able to make a bigger force on the ground, and you will receive a bigger upward force by reaction from the ground. Okay, so this is something that we need also to evaluate if the athlete is doing it well or not. Okay, so we have another graphic here. In this graphic, every dot is one jump by one high jumper in some American national championship. I don't remember which one, but these are just a bunch of pretty good high jumpers. Okay, we have here in the horizontal, we're going to express the action of the arm that is closest to the bar. So
Wonderful.
Braccio destro.
Wonderful, Professor.
okay, so this is the right arm. The action of the right arm is the value you have horizontally. And here on the vertical part of the graph is the action of the arm that is farthest from the bar, which will be
Braccio sinistro.
So one question, Professor. Assuming
Yeah.
that all the high jumpers are left leg takeoff,
Okay.
all of them.
These high jumpers, some were left takeoff, but part of them were right leg takeoff. Okay.
Okay.
So what I did, so that is why the numbers don't say right arm and left arm. They say
Okay.
arm
Yes.
closer to the bar, and arm
Nearest.
farthest. So my red markings here, they're only good if you're taking off from the left foot.
Yes. Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
just, I mean, if you can repeat it, just the first word.
So what I wrote here in red,
Okay.
this,
Yes.
and that is only correct if they were all taking off from the left. Okay, so and then in this diagonal direction, these values in this diagonal direction, that is the combination of both arms. Okay.
Perfect.
Now you say, how do I express these actions? Well, what I do is I look at the start of the takeoff phase, where are the arms? And then at the end of the takeoff phase, where they are. So I see the vertical range of motion of the center of mass of the arm relative to the shoulder, where it was at the beginning of the takeoff phase and where it was at the end of the takeoff phase.
Sure.
Okay, and for the in the same way, I would do something for the lead leg, and that would be the vertical range of motion of the center of mass of the lead leg relative to the right hip. Actually, for the arms is the vertical range of motion relative to the suprasternale, which is this point here. And for the right leg, for the free leg, is the vertical range of motion relative to the average of the two hips. Okay, so this is a very simple number. It's just vertical range of motion, but it also has some corrections in it because I correct for, so this value here should be in meters, right? The value here should be meters and this should be meters, but it actually is the units are millimeters per meter. It's like, what? Okay, so that sounds strange. The units, don't worry about the units. The reason is that I have made corrections in these values that I divide that value by the standing height of the athlete. Because obviously, if you're a big guy, very tall, this movement is going to be much longer distance than if you're a little guy. It's going to be a smaller movement. I correct for the standing height. I also correct for the weight of the limb. Okay, so don't worry about the units. Just think that magic in the horizontal expresses the action of the right arm, the vertical expresses the action of the left arm, and the diagonal expresses the sum of the two arms. So let's look at these values here. If you used equally the right arm and the left arm, your dot, your yellow dot, would fall on this diagonal line. So you would have maybe 4 for the right arm and 4 for the left arm, and boom, it falls on the line, right? But what we see here is that almost all the dots are up and to the left. So what this means is that almost all of these jumpers are using the left arm more than the right arm. So normally you would say, well, there's something wrong. You need to use your right arm more, right? Why is it not working? But no. So why do you use the left arm more than the right arm? The reason is this. So let's say I'm in the end of my run up, I'm traveling that way, and I have my arms ready for the takeoff. But I'm not going to be like this, facing forward. Normally, a high jump will be a little bit running like this, with the body twisted a little bit to the left. So the left arm, this one here, is very low at this point. and it goes from this low position to a high one. So the left arm, this one, goes through a long range of motion. But the right arm, it's already high in this initial position, so it can only have a smaller range of motion. Okay, so this is just normal. It's normal that the right arm, or the arm that is closest to the bar, it will have a smaller action than the arm that is farthest from the bar. So what do you want to look for in this graph? What you want is the sum of both arms to be the biggest possible value. This guy here. Oops, something's happening to my mouse here. It's going crazy. So this, wow. My mouse is going crazy. Okay, so this is, wow.
No, it doesn't curve.
I don't know. Okay, so you see who I'm talking about. That is the person with the strongest arm action total. Who has the weakest arm action? This guy here. So we could say, well, what makes this guy be particularly weak? And we can look at which arm is the main problem. And we see that when we look at where it is this way, we see that it's one of the worst ones in the vertical direction. But it has several others like these. They're all weaker, right? But what this person is really very bad at is in the value for the right arm, because he's here, he's the worst. So it's very far to the left. So this athlete is the worst, and it's primarily because this person's right arm is doing a very bad job.
So, Professor, a question.
Yeah.
So it does mean that you are using the action of the nearest arm to the bar to evaluate the best or the worst?
No, I use both arms.
Okay.
I'm looking at both arms because I'm looking at this diagonal value. Okay, this one is the best one because the diagonal value is something like 19, right? 19.
Okay, okay, understood.
And this one here, the value is about 5.
I see.
Okay, okay.
So diagonal is the ultimate thing you're looking for. That's what counts, the sum. And
Yes,
then
very good.
once you have that sum, if the sum is not good, you say, well, which one is the problem, the right one or the left one?
Yes. So it does mean that the yellow dot that you resigned on the left of the graphic should be positioned around 5 on the diagonal, and the dot 6 near 60 on the vertical axis should have as more than 5 as value. So even if yellow dot is positioned on 6 and apparently the other dot is higher on the vertical axis, but the projection on the vertical is better for 6 than the other one.
I couldn't follow that because I didn't know what point you were talking about. But the ideal is that if you're around this line,
Yes, yes.
good. If
Yes.
you're around this line, it's a little bit less good.
Yes, yes.
Here, mediocre. Here, it's bad. And here would be terrible.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Understood.
Just
Very
position
good.
in this direction, this is what counts. And then we say, look, your value in this diagonal is very low, so you have a problem. So then
Yeah.
the next question is, which arm is mainly responsible for the problem? And you can say, oh, look, it's the right arm or it's the left arm. In the
Yeah.
case of this individual here, both arms are pretty bad, but the one that is really, really horrible is the right arm,
Yes, of course.
because it's the one that is farthest to the left. On the other hand, if you look at this guy here, okay, if you look at that guy, he's not quite so bad. He's got a value of about 12, right? Roughly 11, 12, 11 and a half, maybe,
Yes.
this guy. And we say, okay, what is he particularly good or bad at? Well, he's very good with the right arm. Okay, and on the other hand, his left arm, this value in the vertical direction here, that is pretty bad because he is next to last. Okay, the value for the left arm is this value here. Oops. Oh God, I need a new mouse. Okay, so this distance from here to here, which is a value of about 5.3 or something like that, that's very low. So for this individual, the left arm is the one that is particularly weak. In fact, his right arm, this value from here to here, he's the best. Nobody is better than he is. Okay, so this is how I use this graphic. I can see if your arm action is weak or strong, and then I can say if it's mainly due to the left arm or to the right arm. And I have a similar graphic that shows the combined double arm action, and in the vertical it shows the lead leg action. So you have the sum of the two arms, and here you have the leg. And I have then the sum of all of it. I have the two arms plus the lead leg, and is the total free limb action. That's another number. I tell people that they need to have strong arm actions. But what I really would like to have is a number that represents the combination of how fast the run-up is, how low the run-up is, and how strong your arm action, your free limb actions are. I would like to have that number, combining all of it, but I don't have it. So we saw before, fast run-up puts a bigger stress on it produces higher jump, but it produces stress on the takeoff leg. If you do too much, that's not good. And if you have too much stress, you could have collapse. In the same way, if you're low at the end of the run-up, it also helps you to get a bigger jump, but it also puts more stress on the takeoff leg. So there's a limit that you should not get too low. In the same way, the free limb action, the arms and the lead leg, they also help you to produce a higher jump, but again, they also tend to make the support leg collapse. So really, theoretically, I need one number that describes the sum of these three big factors: run-up speed, how low you are, and your free limb actions. But I don't have that number. So, and sometimes this can lead to a problem. For example, one time I was analyzing the top American women high jumpers. And there was this high jumper who had the American record, and I think it was like 2.03 or 2.04, something like that. I can't remember, something like that. But her run-up speed was 8 or 8.1 meters per second, which is crazy. It's like lightning. And they said, oh, but okay, maybe she's high at the end of the run-up, which would help to alleviate the stress on the takeoff leg. But no, she was fairly low. She was moderately low. Not extremely low, but she was moderately low. So the combination was kamikaze. So that's what I thought. It was a combination that you would expect if instead of jumping 2.03, 2.04, if she were jumping 2.14, yeah, this would be normal numbers for the speed and the height at the end of the run-up. Yeah, so, but you know, she was very good, but not that good. 2.14 would be the world record by a lot. So I would go to the coach and say, you know, this is crazy. You know, she should not be, she's too fast and too low. It's too much of a good thing. It's not so good anymore. But then I looked at the free limb actions. She used nothing. The lead leg was almost nothing. The arms are almost nothing. I don't know where she was, but maybe in this graphic, she would be around here, you know?
Yeah.
So I went to the coach and I said, well, look, I don't know, the speed and the height of the at the end of the run up, those are really crazy, but she compensates by having weak free limb actions. And maybe, I don't know, but maybe she's okay. I'd say, don't make any changes. One thing compensates for the other, except I don't know. I don't know if really the whole thing put together is okay, or maybe too strong, or maybe too weak. I don't know. I need that number that combines all three in, you know, all three factors: run up speed, height, and free limb action into a single number. But I
Mhm.
don't have it. Well, that's a limitation that I still have not solved. Okay, so the next topic will be, the next topic is supposed to be the bar clearance, the start of the bar clearance, which then will be continued in lecture number 3. But before that, I want to talk about something else. This is something that is not about performance, it's about injury. Okay, this is ankle pronation. Okay, so if you have a shoe and your leg, if you're standing on a shoe like this, if your foot goes like this, that's called pronation. This would be called supination. Okay,
Okay.
and if high jumping, you can have a problem with pronation. So let's see. This is a high jump area seen from above, this graphic.
Mhm.
In blue, you have the landing pit. So you see the bar also. You see the standard that holds the bar up. And you see the tartan, tartan in pink. When you start your run up, you run perpendicular to the bar. Then you reach the curve, so you turn more and more towards the left. So at the time that you plant your foot on the ground to start the takeoff phase, you're not traveling perpendicular to the bar anymore, but you also are not traveling parallel to the bar anymore. You're moving in a diagonal direction relative to the bar. And this angle here is about maybe 35 to 40 degrees, maybe. It'll vary a little bit more than that, but that's about the normal angle. So we call this the final direction of the run-up. It's the direction of motion of the center of mass just before the foot hits the ground. And you would expect that your takeoff foot would be planted in perfect alignment with this final direction of the run-up. You expect that. But in practice, that never happens. In practice, always the foot will point outward a little bit relative to that final direction of the run-up.
Mhm.
Also, during the takeoff phase, you know, we've talked about at the end of the run-up, during the takeoff phase, the athlete pushes forward and downward on the ground. Well, the athlete does not push exactly forward and downward on the ground. The athlete will actually push on the ground a little bit to the right. So the footprint orientation and the force made by the foot on the ground, they're not aligned. There's an angle E between the force made and the footprint. So by reaction, the ground makes a force that is equal and opposite on the foot. And it's also deviated by the same angle, E. Okay, so E, normally it can be about 10, 20, 25 degrees. That's okay. But if that angle is too big, then there's a problem because it'll tend to produce pronation of the foot. So let's say that I'm running, my run-up is that way, right towards the camera, and I plant my foot in line, that would be an E angle of 0. Now, in reality, the angle will be, you'll be more like this. So it'll be planting maybe at a 25-degree angle. Now, I'm going to give you a very exaggerated version of this so you understand the concept more easily. Imagine if E were 90 degrees. It never happens, but imagine. So the foot will hit the ground, and when it hits the ground, it'll hit and it'll tend to roll. It'll hit and roll. So the foot would roll this way, but meanwhile, the ankle is here and the knee is back here. So what you have is a huge pronation. So, of course, nobody plants the foot at a 90-degree angle like this. Nobody has E equals 90, but they do have it at 40 and 50. So when the foot hits, there is not as much of a tendency to roll as when it was a 90, but still there is a tendency to roll. So what is the right angle? Well, up to roughly 25 degrees or so, it's okay. If it's more than that, it's more and more and more dangerous. If the foot is parallel to the bar, so the foot, instead of being like you see in the drawing, if the foot were completely parallel to the bar, that's always too much out, toeing out, too much outward pointing of the toe. So if your high jumper shoe is the footprint, if it's parallel to the bar, it's too much. And I'm going to show you a movie. This is a movie made in 1988, and it was made by Dr. Bart van Geluwe. He's Belgian, and he shot this with a special video camera that shot at 1,000 pictures per second. And he filmed this at a good competition. These are all elite high jumpers. Yeah, at this time in 1988, video that shot at 1,000 pictures per second was unheard of. Okay, so I'm going to play the video now, okay? Okay, so what you're seeing, in part, the foot is not pronating as much as you think, because the foot is sliding inside the shoe. So the shoe goes very far this way, but the foot doesn't go as far. Not quite, but the foot is pronating, okay? Not as much as it looks like, but it is pronating.
Ok,
Wow.
il piede non è in pronazione come sembra perché è comunque dentro la scarpa, quindi è la scarpa che è in pronazione, però comunque sia, nonostante tutto, è in pronazione.
And you would think that after doing this athlete was taken immediately to the hospital, right?
Esatto, sembrerebbe che appunto l'atleta dopo una pronazione del genere, insomma, debba essere portato immediatamente all'ospedale.
But no, he just went back and kept jumping like this, every single jump.
Ok, ma invece no, ha continuato a saltare e a continuare a pronare l'arto nella stessa maniera per tutti gli altri salti che ha fatto.
The human ankle, especially in trained athletes, it's really very strong.
Quindi la caviglia umana, specialmente in questo tipo di atleti, è davvero molto resistente, molto forte alla pronazione.
But doing this in every jump of the competition and in every competition during the year and during many years, in the end, it breaks.
Certo, però continuare a saltare in questo modo per tutta la gara, per tutte le gare dell'anno e per la carriera, certo, prima o poi si rompe la caviglia.
So, well, it doesn't quite break the ankle, but you get injured.
Ok, probabilmente non proprio rompere la caviglia, ma sicuramente ti fai male.
So this produces a hyperextension on the medial part of the ankle and a compression on the lateral part of the ankle.
Perché questo provoca una compressione nella parte media della caviglia e
No compressione.
Elongazione. Elongazione.
elongazione nella parte media e una pressione sulla parte esterna. Ho capito bene?
Okay, so how can you check if your athlete is having problems of this kind? Well, I can tell you in a second. Okay, this is the next slide, but I'm going to use it as my blackboard. Okay,
Quindi,
here is the two standards. This is the bar.
Yeah.
And you need to film this with a video camera, even if it's running normal video, which in PAL is 50 pictures per second, you'll be able to see it. So have a camera shooting from here. Oops. And this angle should be, I don't know, maybe 25 degrees, or maybe 45 degrees. It depends on the individual athlete, but something in between those two angles you can see, and you can see the foot going. Okay, so we're through with this problem with the pronation. Next thing is the bar clearance. So as this slide shows, we're talking about the bar clearance now. Okay, so here we have a high jumper. The high jumper has come in with a high speed, low position of the center of mass. The athlete has used the arms very well during the takeoff phase, and the lead leg also. The takeoff leg is flexed and extended very well too. So here we are at the end of the takeoff. And at that time, the athlete will have a leftover horizontal velocity. So the 7 or 8 meters per second now are maybe 4 meters per second of horizontal velocity. But the athlete also has produced a vertical velocity. And that vertical velocity is very important, because that vertical velocity of the center of mass determines how much height you're going to go beyond the takeoff point to the peak of the jump. So once the takeoff is completed, there are some things that cannot be changed. One of these things that cannot be changed affects translation. And by translation, I don't mean translating from English to Italian. I mean translation versus rotation, okay? Translation.
Okay.
So, key thing, you cannot change the path of the center of mass. Once you leave the ground, you cannot change the path of the center of mass. It doesn't matter if you're Da Pena or if you're Sotomayor, nobody can change the path.
To say the bit.
Now, does this mean that your translation in the air is completely fixed? No. You have certain degrees of freedom. You can do some actions in the air. So what you can do is this. You can do what is called compensational movements of body parts. So when you're in the air, your center of mass is a fixed path. You cannot change that. But if you decide to move one part of the body in one direction, the rest of the body will move in the opposite direction to keep the center of mass in the same place. So for example, a high jumper who is near the peak of the jump, if you lower your head and lower your legs, the hips go up as a compensation to keep the center of mass in the same original path. So the hips go up. Okay, very good. So you have compensational movements that you can make. So this is for translation. This is what I just said. After the takeoff is completed, some things cannot be changed. One of them affects translation, and that is you cannot change the path of the center of mass. So repeat slide. The other thing that you cannot change in the air affects rotation. And what you cannot change is this. You cannot change the body's angular momentum. So we need to talk a little bit about angular momentum. What is that? Angular momentum is a mechanical factor that makes you rotate. If you have a lot of angular momentum, you tend to rotate fast. If you have very little angular momentum, you tend to rotate more slowly. If your angular momentum is clockwise, your body will rotate clockwise. Okay. Now, so this angular momentum, once you leave the ground, in theory, the angular momentum can be produced in the run-up or in the takeoff. You can only change it while you're in contact with the ground. So you could be changing it in the run-up, or you can be changing it in the takeoff. But once you're off the ground, it's constant. And I'll tell you now that the change is primarily produced not in the run-up, but in the takeoff phase. Okay, so your angular momentum is constant. But does that mean that your rotations in the air are completely determined? And the answer is no. Well, after the stacco, in the air, once you finish the takeoff phase, angular momentum is constant, but your rotation is not fixed. It's not determined completely. Okay, so what actions can you do in the air with respect to rotation? One of them is you can do action and reaction rotations of body parts. So if you make one part of the body rotate faster, but by using your muscles, you can make one part of your body rotate faster. That'll make some other part of the body rotate more slowly. So classical example is this one in the high jump. You have a high jumper. The high jumper is arched over the bar, and the whole body is rotating counterclockwise in this view. So if the high jumper stayed frozen in this body configuration, then the legs would always catch the bar and knock it down. Because the rotation, the counterclockwise rotation, is not enough to make the legs clear the bar. So what will the athlete do? The athlete will use the muscles that cross in the front part of the hip joint, and he will use those muscles to slow down the counterclockwise rotation of the trunk, and therefore speed up the counterclockwise rotation of the legs. So in fact, it may be done so strongly that the trunk, which is right now rotating counterclockwise, it may actually end up rotating a little bit clockwise.
Quindi potrebbe verificarsi che il tronco che in questa fase sta ruotando in senso antiorario si trovasse invece a ruotare leggermente in senso orario.
So what you see is the trunk actually rotates a little bit clockwise, and that makes the legs rotate counterclockwise very fast.
Quindi quello che vediamo è che il tronco in questa fase si muove leggermente in senso orario e quindi produce una velocizzazione della rotazione in senso antiorario delle gambe.
Okay, so one thing you can do in the air is you can do action and reaction rotations of body parts. This is a little bit similar to what we saw with the translation. If one part of the body translates one way, some other parts of the body will translate in the opposite direction. Here, what do we have? If you make one part of the body rotate in one direction, some other part will tend to rotate in the opposite direction. Okay, so, but in regard to rotation, there's another kind of freedom that you don't have for the translation. In rotation, you can make the whole body rotate faster, the whole thing, everything rotate faster by making the body be more compact in relation to the axis of rotation. If you have been in some physics lecture at some point recently, that is called reducing the moment of inertia.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at one example of this. This is a figure skater. This figure skater, in this case, we're going to be looking at rotation about a vertical axis. And in this case, we see that the arms are very far from the vertical axis, passing through the center of mass. And the lead leg, the right leg, is also very far from the vertical axis, passing through the center of mass. So we call this a not very compact body configuration. So he's going to be rotating counterclockwise in a view from overhead, and then he is going to bring his arms in to the middle. You're going to bring the right leg into the middle. So now his body will be more compact, and you will see that he will rotate faster.
Perciò se guardandolo dall'alto, più si compatta raggruppando le braccia e la gamba, più ruota velocemente.
You can see there. Okay, so the arms and the leg are spread out, not compact, slow rotation, brings them in, fast rotation.
Quindi più
Da una
suave,
posizione spread, cioè
lontana.
aperta, lontana, avvicina le braccia, avvicina la gamba destra e aumenta la rotazione perché passa in una posizione più compatta.
Okay, so these are general principles that our high jumper will need to deal with during the airborne phase.
Questi sono principi generali con i quali comunque il saltatore in alto deve fare i conti durante la fase di volo.
Okay, so let's look at a high jumper and see possible movements that a high jumper could do in the air. So we have a person here that's going to take off from the ground and reach a higher height. And this athlete, let's say, had only a translation. It has no angular momentum at all. It's like a basketball player jumping to make a dunk. Now, in the air, so this is a purely a translation. And our athlete now is going to choose to lower the arms and lower the right leg. So the arms will go down, the right leg will go down, something else has to go up. What will go up is the head, the trunk, and the left leg. Okay? So by lowering the arms and the right leg, the head goes a little bit up, the foot goes a little bit up. You can see that, right?
Yeah.
Also, notice that the arms and the right leg, they don't only go down, they also go a little bit towards the right, towards our right. So the head and the trunk and the left leg, they go a little bit towards the left. See that?
Quindi praticamente quando le braccia, la gamba e l'arto libero si abbassano, vanno verso destra, mentre il tronco e la testa vanno verso sinistra, innalzandosi.
So if this person decides that he's not going to dunk a basketball, he wants to do a high jump, this is the best height that he can clear. This is if he made a jump with no angular momentum. Okay, what else could this person do? Well, let's say, again, another jump, the same way, same takeoff, reaches the peak, but now he's going to do something different. What he's going to do is he's going to lift both legs up. Again, this is a pure translation again. So the legs are going to go up, so something else is going to go down. That'll be the head, the arms, and the trunk. Okay? Compensational translations, right? Okay, if he were trying to do a high jump, now he could clear, with the same height of the center of mass, he could clear a higher bar. So the center of mass goes to the same height, but now you can clear a higher bar. Okay, so now we have a jumper again, takes off, goes to the same height, but now we're going to have rotation also. Well, with this rotation, he could get into this position, which would allow him to clear a bar that is much higher. This is what we call a Fosbury flop. Okay, so it's obvious that a high jumper is going to need angular momentum because you don't want to be in these positions at the peak of the jump. You want to be like this at the peak of the jump. So a high jumper will need to rotate in the air. For that, the high jumper will need to have angular momentum. And this angular momentum cannot be produced in the air. You have to produce it during the takeoff phase. Now, the airborne rotations of a high jump are essentially a twisting somersault. From, I don't know, in Spanish you call it tirabuzón, is when you have curls like this, a corkscrew, like a corkscrew, okay? So you're doing a somersault and a twist, and they happen simultaneously.
Cavatappi.
Cavatappi.
Yes.
So you need a twist rotation and a somersault rotation. So the twist rotation is a rotation about a vertical axis. It's a rotation like this.
Yes.
And it's a rotation that happens very early in the jump.
E questa rotazione appare nella prima fase del salto in alto.
And it makes your back point towards the bar.
E fa sì che il nostro,
La parte
la parte
posteriore.
posteriore sia allineata con l'asticella.
Okay? But then you also, simultaneously, you have to make a somersault rotation. And the somersault rotation is a rotation about an axis that is more or less parallel to the bar. So this is a rotation that brings your shoulders down and brings your knees up.
Questa è una rotazione che porta le nostre spalle in basso e le nostre ginocchia in alto.
So these rotations are obviously happening at the same time. You're doing a twist and a somersault at the same time.
Le due rotazioni ovviamente avvengono nello stesso momento.
So both of these rotations require angular momentum.
Entrambe le rotazioni richiedono un momento angolare.
So you need to have the angular momentum needs to have a twisting component of angular momentum and a somersaulting component of angular momentum. Okay, so we need to generate these two angular momentum components. So first we'll look at the twisting component of angular momentum. The somersaulting component, we will not look at it today. We finish at the end of twisting. Okay, so we look now at how this twisting component of angular momentum is generated in an actual jump. Here we have our high jumper. So the way this twisting component of angular momentum, which is angular momentum about a vertical axis, and this is an overhead view of a high jumper, and how you generate the angular momentum during the takeoff phase is that the right leg is going to go forward and then is going to go to the left. And also another thing that helps to generate the angular momentum for the twist is that the trunk will rotate like this. So you'll get to the takeoff and you will do this actively using your muscles.
Un altro elemento che facilita la rotazione sull'asse verticale è che il tronco ruota nella direzione dell'arto libero.
Sì.
Dall'arto libero.
Okay, so
Tenendo le braccia vicino al corpo.
this is an animation. See the right leg, how it goes? Goes across the body. So the right leg goes forward, 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 and across the body, across the body, across the body.
Quindi la gamba destra si muove in avanti, in avanti, in avanti fino a incrociare il corpo.
And in the same way, the trunk also twists counterclockwise.
E nello stesso momento anche il tronco ruota in senso antiorario.
So how does this produce angular momentum? So here we see the high jumper again. That is the center of mass. This is the final direction of the run-up. So normally, you would be, if you did not want to produce angular momentum, normally you just push with your foot downward and forward. So you would make a force that would point in that direction, okay? That arrow should be here at the foot, but I'm going to draw other things. So I'm trying to keep this area clean around here.
Okay.
Now, as you throw your right leg forward and to the left, that's a counterclockwise movement. And by reaction, the rest of the body tries to go clockwise. So the lead leg is going like this, and the foot will tend to go this way. Okay, this foot will tend to go this way. So it will tend to go that way, towards the right. And because of that, the force that the foot makes on the ground will not point perfectly forward. It will point like this. So instead of being pointing like this to here, it'll add an extra force that way, and that's how you point at an angle like that. So the foot is trying to move towards the right, but it's attached to the ground. So the spikes will push on the ground towards the right. So by reaction, the ground will push on the foot in this yellow direction here. So as you can see, the force made by the ground on the body does not pass through the center of mass. Notice that this is off center here, right? This distance is called the moment arm or the lever arm of the force about the center of mass. So you have an off-center force. So let's say that this is an object that I want to make it rotate, and the center of mass of this object is here in the middle of it, right?
Okay.
If I push on it in this direction, it will translate in that direction. We don't worry about that, but also it will rotate. If the force I make is like this, it'll make a torque of this kind about the center of mass, and the object will rotate this way in the air.
Tanto più
So in the same way, this force here doesn't pass to the center of mass, so it produces this kind of a rotation. And this is your twisting angular momentum. Okay, so after talking all this much about producing the twisting angular momentum, it turns out that so everybody does it okay, pretty much, without studying physics, without applying formulas, but they do it and it works. Now, sometimes it looks like there's a problem. Like sometimes you'll find an athlete at the peak of the jump, and the athlete, instead of being like this, the athlete will be like this or like that. And it seems that that is a problem with the twist rotation, but normally it is not. It comes from other reasons. But it's not a problem with the twist component of angular momentum, almost never. It's much more common to have problems with the somersaulting component of angular momentum. That is where the problems are, which is what we will see in the next lecture. And with that, we're finished. Okay, that's the end of it.